What if there was a way to save money on your grocery bill and save the planet?
This is the Earth Day Party Podcast with Shannon Burns and Sarah Christie. Get in, bestie. We're going to clean up the planet.
Welcome back to another episode of the Earth Day Party. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Sarah.
And we are diving into conversations with different experts about the planet, sustainability, and what we can do to make a difference.
Okay, Shannon, think about your fridge right now. Is there food in there that is potentially going bad? And you're not going to get around to eating it.
Yeah. And you know what? I try so hard, but sometimes things you just forget and you neglect it. And then, you got to throw it out before you have a chance to eat it. What about you?
Probably. It's cilantro. It's just they sell, it's such a big bundle and you can't have that much cilantro. Also, my partner is a picky eater, so we kind of grocery shop separately. So if I bring food into the house, it's ultimately up to me to eat it all. He is not touching cilantro. What's going bad in your fridge right now?
Probably there's a zucchini in there. There's a cucumber. There's just that I have a whole produce section that we really try to get through every single week. But then, you know what? Once in a while, you just don't want to cook and you want to eat a burger instead, you know?
But also, that's a great point, because are you also bad for this on days where it's like, I've been working all day, it's such a long day, I don't have the energy to cook? Do you just order takeout or grab food on the way home, even though you have food in your fridge?
Absolutely. Sometimes I'm just not in the mood for what I have at home. So that's a big thing for me. I try not to eat out as much as I have in the past, but I'm feeling a little called out right now, Sarah.
I mean, you and me both, but it's also hard seeing the rise in grocery costs right now. My mom and I text about this back and forth. We both go grocery shopping on the weekend. I think most people do, but we'll text each other whenever there's a sale on something, because it's just wild how fast your grocery bill rises right now. It feels like anytime you step into the store, you're immediately spending $50. So it's hard to watch that food go to waste knowing how much you spent on it.
Yeah, exactly. I know it really feels like when I'm putting that sad zucchini into the compost, I'm like, this feels like I'm literally tossing some toonies in there. Like, it feels like you're really actually wasting so much money.
Which is where this conversation is going to be so helpful. Craig Hodge, chair of the National Zero Waste Council, which is an organization that brings together organizations to advance waste and prevention and the circular economy in Canada. So Craig joins us to talk all things grocery costs, food waste, the climate crisis, and how it's all connected. He's going to answer questions like, are we storing food properly? Are we buying ingredients we don't need? And then also share some really useful information that I think opened both of our eyes up to best before dates.
Yes.
And how maybe we're taking them too seriously.
I know, and just the definition of it in general. I learned so much in this conversation, so I hope that you do too. When we think about food waste, why should we also in that be thinking about the environment?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that food waste has impacts in a number of ways. Certainly, there's an environmental impact. If we're growing and producing more food than we're eating, then that's wasteful, and food production has an impact on the environment. And so does food waste. And it's interesting to note that if food waste was a country, it would be the third largest creator of greenhouse gas behind U.S. and China. So food waste contributes to greenhouse gases, and at the same time, food that's wasted is also filling up landfills if it's not properly disposed of. And this is a time that we are very conscious of food insecurity, food production. With what's going on now internationally. We want to make sure that the food that we import into this country and the food that we grow is consumed. Almost 50% of the food that's grown in this country is never consumed by people, and so it's lost between the farm and our kitchen. And so some of the areas that we lose food are in production, in transportation, in the stores. And even of the food that actually makes it into the home, 50% of that food is lost. So it's lost right in our kitchen.
Wow, that's shocking.
In Canada, avoidable household food waste is 2 million tons per year. And that's the equivalent of about 2 million cars. So food waste in landfills creates methane and greenhouse gases. And so it's, and then there's a lot of water that's consumed to grow the food as well. So it's a big environmental footprint for the food that we produce. And so that's why it's important that we make every bit of food that we produce that it's consumed.
Is there a dollar equivalent? I know you mentioned the cars, but I'm wondering, in a time when we're all so concerned about the rising cost of our groceries, if that picture can be painted as well.
We're very concerned about cost right now. I mean, food prices are rising. I know that it works out to, I think, about 4.5 meals per week is what we lose. So I don't know if I have a dollar figure. I mean, the food is going up continually. What we do know is that we need to start looking at ways that we can reduce food waste. Certainly in supermarkets is a key production. But really, as individuals, what we really have to concentrate is making sure that we don't buy more food that we're going to be able to use. There's some tips that we use at the National Zero Waste Council just about how to reduce food waste in the home. Some of the things that we suggest doing are certainly plan your meals. And I know this is hard, sort of got to make the list, but plan your meals and make sure you use what you buy and only buy what you're going to need. And then once you get home, make sure that you store it properly. So yeah, in terms of plan, make a shopping list, plan out the meals. And think about leftovers as well, because quite often you're going to, not be able to buy in the exact quantities that you need. So plan for your leftover use. One of the tips, and I tell people, don't go to the store and just go up and down the aisle and start pulling stuff off the shelf, which is the way I used to shop. And then you're trying to think, geez, do I still have any sour cream in the fridge or not? And so one of the tips, if you're one of those people that just wants to figure it out when you get to the store, what I suggest doing is before you go, open up the fridge, take out your phone and snap a photo of the inside of your fridge. That way, at least when you get to the store that you remember what leftovers and what you already have in your fridge. And then try to plan menus to use up what you already have. And as I said, if you're planning a meal, make sure that you also plan for how do I use the leftovers. And so one of the things that I do when I'm at home making meals alone, what I will often do is I'll sort of say, okay, I'm going to go out and buy a roasted chicken, and I'll buy some salad. Well, there's my dinner, but then I'll sort of say, well, why don't I pick up 2 dinner rolls as well? So tomorrow I can put the leftover salad and the rest of the chicken in and make a sandwich. So there's dinner tonight and lunch tomorrow. So you plan ahead so that you can figure out how you're going to use your leftovers. And one of the other things that I think that you have to be really, one of the other things you can do is make sure that you, again, store food properly. I tell people, organize your fridge. Put the stuff that's going to expire first, put it near the front of the fridge. And the other thing is that we always remind people of there's a difference between expiry dates and best before dates. And best before does not mean that the product has expired. It doesn't at midnight that night. It doesn't mean that the food is suddenly unedible. What it really is there is the best before date gives the grocers and others sort of an idea of how they can rotate their stock and try to move stock forward. And this you can use the same at your own home. Check your best before dates in your cupboards and move that stuff to the front so that it does get used up while it's still edible. And in many cases, food is fit for consumption long after the best before dates.
Yeah, Sarah and I were actually just talking about that. Sarah, what did you say about best before dates?
Oh, just that both of the oat milk cartons in my fridge are past their best before dates. That's kind of my trick to saving money on groceries because that's when they're marked down. So I've been onto something here. Best before is different than expiry.
Yes, exactly. And best before is just an indication of when food was manufactured, and often it's quite arbitrary by the food producers that what dates they want to put on. This is one of the things that we've tried to really been working with the industry is how do we recognize that best before date is not an expiry date.
You just mentioned some of the ways that individuals can reduce food waste, but I know the National Zero Waste Council does incredible work to push for policy change. What are some of the big changes the organization would like to see?
Well, certainly that's one of the things that we have been lobbying for is just more clarification on the best before date, because I think that creates a lot of confusion about best before versus expiry date. We're also doing a lot of work on educational pieces. One of the things things that we've been also lobbying for is that a lot of food is thrown away just because of its look, because of imperfection. So apples that have spots on them, or potatoes that have grown into a funny shape or something. It's all good food, but there's this sort of thought that it has to look perfect. And so one of the things that we're talking about is that let's find ways to use that food. And if we're not going to buy it in the store, are the ways that it can be used through some of the food share programs like Food Mesh and others that we can use, and make sure that that food that may not be on the front of the shelf in the store, that's still edible food. And so that if you don't think that you can sell it at a premium price, then let's find ways that we can make sure that that food is eaten by people who may be struggling with food security. And so those are some of the things that we're doing, and better farming practices, and we want to make sure that we don't lose food in transportation, and certainly encouraging more food to be grown closer to its source where it's going to be consumed. I think those are all keys as well. And one of the things we've also talked about is even food once you get it home is making sure that you store it properly. One of the things that I learned just recently is that that potatoes are often stored somewhere where it's dark, and that they can last longer if they're stored in a cool, dark place. But what I didn't know is that you're not supposed to store the potatoes with the onions. And I didn't know this, but something apparently goes on when they're together in the dark, and something happens because when you store the potatoes with the onions, the potatoes sprout faster and age faster. So learning tips about just how to store food properly, how to make sure that it's stored in the fridge, on the shelf, and as I said, something just do the research and look to how you can extend the life of foods so that they're still good for consumption.
I got really into vegetable gardening in the past few years, and I've grown some of the ugliest vegetables you'll ever see, but I eat them. Don't want that work to go to waste. So it's nice to hear that wasn't sketchy.
All food. It's all food, right? It doesn't matter. So and that's the important thing that we have to just try to reinforce to people is to make sure that we consume what we purchase and don't overbuy and plan ahead.
Yeah, I've learned about ugly vegetables as well because my partner and I, we signed up for receiving that produce box every week. That is all the leftover vegetables or ones that don't look as nice. So we get that now every week. So we've eaten way more vegetables, and some of them are ugly, but some of them are also really great. So that's been our kind of little way of trying to eat some of the food that might otherwise go to waste. So that's so great.
There's some really good stuff on our website. You can go to the National Zero Waste Council, and we have some tips there. You can go to look up Love Food. hatewaste.ca. There's some tips there, and there's even recipes as well. And I think this is the key thing, is just looking at what you can do with the leftover food, whether it's making soup, planning to make sandwiches the next day, bringing food with you to work, not just buying the convenience, but make sure that if you've got food at home, package it up, put a nice block with it, and bring it for lunch the next day at work. I think that's another way that we can make sure that we use the food that's in our home already.
We came across this on the website for National Zero Waste Council. I'm wondering how it's going. It said Canada's leading food retailers announced in 2019 a voluntary commitment to measure, monitor, and act on reducing food loss and waste by 50% by 2025. So how is that going?
Yeah, and I haven't heard the results of that. I think that, one of the things that when we look at the National Zero Waste Council, it's an initiative of Metro Vancouver. And we work in waste prevention in a number of areas, but across, and including food, and across Canada, we work with other levels of government, and we work with business, and we work with the nonprofits. So I think that when we get the retailers and the producers signing on and making their commitment to try to reduce waste, I think that's key. Some of them now have been very successful working with some of the food recovery groups, so that the food, instead of being just put out in the dumpster at the back of the store, now they start to watch when things are getting close to expiry, and then looking at ways to either have apps. I know some of the stores now have apps where you can they will put food on, so this is what the sale is going to be tonight, this is what we've got left over at the end of the day, and then what's not sold at a discount is then donated to some of the food recovery programs.
That's so great. I know of a few apps that are combating this as well. Too Good to Go lists reduced food in your area from restaurants and grocery stores. The listener might also be curious to check out Food Hero, Food for All. It's encouraging to see more awareness.
At the end of the day, we're really trying to do two things. We're trying to reduce the waste, which is creating greenhouse gas. But at the second time, we're wanting to make sure that at this time of high food prices and people who are struggling with food security are getting that food.
Yeah. Is any of this whole conversation, is that at all connected in the rising cost of groceries?
You know what? I think that the rising cost of groceries has brought an awareness to food reduction and food waste, and I think that's been, if anything you can say there's been a positive. I think people are more aware, and I think that as we see the potential for tariffs on imported goods, we're going to see people buying less of imported food, which means that there's less waste in transportation and less transportation costs. But I think it means that people are going to be more aware of what they buy, how much they buy, and placing, I think, a higher value on food. I think, we sometimes take food for granted, and I think now people are going to be more aware of the price of it. And I think we could even in some cases start to see some shortages of things that we saw on the shelf we may not see. So I think that this is an opportunity for all of us to rethink our purchasing habits. Certainly, there's a movement now to buy Canadian, which means buying foods that are produced closer to home. But at the same time, we have to recognize that all food has a value, and that we have to make sure that we don't waste it.
One of the terms that kept popping up as we were researching for this interview was a circular food system. Can you explain what that's referring to? Because it sounds like that's the end goal for so much of this.
Yeah, I mean, the circularity is important. That we want to make sure that, again, it comes down to making sure that we don't overproduce, that we don't waste, and that we keep the food into the system. In terms of circularity, it means that the food isn't going to be sold in the store is donated. And of course, at the end of the day, if food does have to be disposed of, that it's disposed of in such a manner that it's used in the help to growing new food. In some cases, some food is shipped to farms where it becomes feed for other animals in the production of food for us. And in other cases, it's making sure that it's properly composted, providing nutrients to the soil to grow the next crop. So there's been a lot of work done in terms of how do we deal with wasted food. But at the National Zero Waste Council, our philosophy in all things is let's not create the waste in the first place. And I think that's the goal of reducing waste, is not to create it in the first place.
That's so great. I feel like I've learned so much. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, no, I thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about this with you.
And I feel very validated about the oat milk that's in my fridge right now. So this is great.
Okay, thanks so much.
What an insightful conversation with Craig. What did he say? We waste 50% of the food that is from farms by the time that it gets to us. That's insane.
Yeah, were you just hearing dollar signs going off, or like coin change like jingling in your head when he said that because of the cost of groceries right now?
I couldn't believe it. There's got to be more solutions out there. I feel like this is not a good system that's set up in general.
No, absolutely not. So what were some of your big takeaways aside from 50%? What were some of your big takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, I think the best before date I didn't even think of. I think in my brain I think of it as the same thing as an expiry date. So if it's after the best before date, I'm like, oh, that's expired. I shouldn't eat or drink that item. But it just means it's best before that date, but you can definitely have it afterwards. So that was very eye-opening.
Remember when he recommended the smell test?
Yeah.
Like, do you remember doing those during COVID? We would just go around smelling things to see if we had COVID or not. It's like that, but you're actually being a little eco-warrior, just going around smelling your food to make sure it's still okay.
Totally. And it really makes me want to go in my fridge, too, and see the things that say best before and the things that say expiry date.
I think I'm going to spend a lot more time shopping the ugly section in the grocery store. I try really hard to do that in general because it's so discounted, but just to spend more time, maybe even Googling, taking a step back and going, okay, right now I see broccoli on there. I see avocados. What can I make with those two ingredients? Like taking out my phone and Googling a recipe with those, and then taking advantage of the fact that A, it's cheaper, and B, it's still good even though it's a little ugly.
Yeah, and I did mention too that I get a produce box every week that is full of uglier quote unquote items. Most of the time it looks totally fine, which I'm really surprised by. I forgot to mention what that company's called, but it's called Odd Bunch. And I posted about it once, and I was so shocked with the amount of people that responded saying that they also have that subscription. It's becoming a very popular thing, so I love to see that as well. Something else that I'm going to do that he recommended was take a photo of the inside of your fridge. I have so many times when I'm at a grocery store and I can't remember if I have that item already, and then I end up doubling it. So that's definitely something that I'm going to be doing too.
In the age of technology that we're living in right now, have you seen those fridges that have the app basically, so you can look inside your fridge when you're at the grocery store?
Yeah.
I've seen those and I'm like, that's crazy. Maybe not.
Yeah, totally. And if you're not, maybe you can't afford one of those fridges. Something else that I've seen that I think is such a good idea is just have like a piece of paper on the outside of your freezer and have a list of what's in your freezer. Because how many times do we put food away in the freezer and then you look after a few months and you find that item that's in the back of your freezer that you totally forgot about? Put a list, even put a date that you put it in, and just on the outside of your freezer, you don't even have to open it. You'll know exactly what's in there, and then you can plan accordingly.
That's a great idea. I recently had a conversation with a friend who was talking about how he hates buying avocados because he's like, they go bad in a day. And this is my hill that I will die on. They don't. I think most people are just afraid of a little brown avocado, a little mushy avocado.
Softness,
they last for so much longer than people actually realize. And he got back to me recently saying, you know what, I think I was just afraid of ugly avocados. So he lets them go a little bit longer now. And I mean, you can freeze them. It's a different texture for sure. It's not the same texture, but there are ways to store them. And they are one of the most misunderstood pieces of food.
I love that. I've never heard avocados be described as misunderstood.
They are. They're a very complex food. We also talked briefly about compost in there, but worth mentioning because I learned this recently, and I think it's also another misunderstood piece of information when we're talking about food waste. Like, people will throw out an apple core in the garbage and think, okay, it's just going to decompose. It's actually really bad for the environment.
Is it?
Because it releases methane because it doesn't have the air to breathe and properly decompose and properly be composted. And methane is a more potent greenhouse gas emission than CO2.
What?
So whenever and if ever you can compost versus throwing food scraps in the trash, that is a huge climate action that you can take as an individual.
Wow, I didn't know that. I do want to shout out Canada too, because my partner is American, so we are constantly comparing our two countries. Canada does such a good job, especially here in Ontario anyways, of composting and giving you a compost bin and having that as part of our recycling garbage cycle that we have, which is not something that I see in the States at all. Canada also bans garbage disposals because of how bad they are for the environment. So many people I see in America throw all their food down the garbage disposal and just grind it all up. So I think that's so great that Canada does that as well. And there's been some friends I've visited in the States who don't even have recycling at their apartment building. They either have to like drive it somewhere or just throw it in the trash. So all the more reasons I love Canada and the things that we are doing.
But I will add that I've lived in an apartment here in Canada and we didn't have compost because the building just didn't pay for.
No way.
I don't know, actually. Thinking back, I don't know why they didn't have compost.
Wow.
So my solution was I got compost bags and I would put them in my freezer. And then my friend lived nearby. She had compost. So I would drive them or walk them over to her house and she would let me use her compost. So shout out to the friends who let you compost.
I love that. And thank you for going the extra mile just to get that out there.
What are you going to try to do differently after this conversation?
Definitely take a photo inside of my fridge. To maybe plan out more meals. I really try to use up what I have and make a plan. But I think just every beginning of the week, making a plan for that week of what dinners I'm going to make. And yeah, just make sure less food goes to waste. What about you?
Meal prep. Definitely store my onions away from my potatoes because I can picture my pantry right now and they're together. So that's my bad. Good to know.
And I'm going to try to understand avocados a little bit more. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Sarah, and thank you so much for coming out to the Earth Day party.
Earth Day Party podcast is in support of WWF Canada. Help protect wildlife and fight climate change during Earth Month with a gift to WWF Canada. You can give now at wwf.ca/earthmonth.